ability to explore so many of these amazing regions all around the world, and also all these wild and crazy grape varietals. And it really is through tasting all these wines and getting to explore so many different wines that you'll be able to really get to understand what it is that you love and what it is maybe that you don't love about these wines, and make more informed decisions going forward. And I'm hoping that through this experience, people have some of those aha moments where you get to try a wine that you might have thought you would have never liked or enjoyed before, and you have it and it's amazing, and you just get really excited about kind of that like feeling of exploration and discovery. So, without further ado, would you like to learn about some of the wines tonight? Amazing. So what I'll do is I'll go over each wine for you one by one. And then in between, we'll have some time to have some questions, because I want this to be a really fun and interactive experience. Since it's a smaller group tonight, since we just got started, it's going to be really easy to do a Q&A session, and you can get like as animated as you'd like. I just recommend you turn off your mute, you keep your mute on during this whole process, except for when you're asking a question. And you can feel free to, since it once again is a smaller group, if you want to stop me at any point and ask a question kind of mid when I'm going over wine, you're more than welcome to. But I'll also, after each wine, give you a little bit of time to do a Q&A. Does that work well? Awesome. Cool. We're going for it. Amazing. So we have 4 different wines that we picked for our November box, which is focused on classic regions, but cutting edge producers. So with Gordon's, we do like to focus on some of these classic regions. We have a really strong presence in France, but all around the world too. But we thought it would be kind of cool to take some of these really well-known regions and somewhat producers too, and also focus on some of the stories that make some of these really awesome areas great, and focus on some of the kind of cutting edge younger blood that's finding its way into the winemaking world. So we have 4 different exciting offerings, 2 whites and 2 reds. And without further ado, I'll go into the first. I have them all laid out here. I don't expect you to drink all of the wines with me tonight. I think part of the fun of this is you can experience them at your own time, but this is just an opportunity to learn more about them. So first I have the 2019 Eva Frick Verde Riesling, which is from the Rheingau region in Germany. What's really exciting about this wine is Riesling is always one of those grape varietals that I think is really challenging for people. People are either really into Riesling and they're super geeky about it, or they get really freaked out when they hear the word Riesling, because there are so many different styles of the grapes. So we're actually going to be focusing later on Chardonnay, which is another one of those somewhat polarizing white grape varietals. But what I love about Riesling is the fact that it is super versatile, depending on where it's grown around the world and how it's manipulated. So this is coming from a winemaker named Eva Frick. She actually came from a beer making family originally in southern Germany, and she's actually had like winemaking expertise all around the world, working in Australia, working in Piedmont in northern Italy, working in France, and she really honed her winemaking skills and ended up coming back to Germany, where she was really enjoying kind of working with some of these local legendary producers, among them a really great Riesling producer named Joseph Leitz. And she decided around 2006 to start her own winery. So she started it named after her namesake, Eva Frick. She's kind of part of the group of pioneering female winemakers in Germany, which is really starting to see a resurgence. And it's really, really exciting, especially for a young woman in the industry, to see all of these really exciting women really take on the challenge of starting their own winery, and really doing so by making wines that just have really beautiful characteristics to them, and they're not overpowering in any way. So what I like about the Rieslings that Eva makes is they're very traditional to what you find in the Rheingau region. The Rheingau is going to be just a little to the south of the Mosel Valley, which is going to be the most classic region for Riesling production. And it's definitely known, similar to Mosel, as being known for these amazing steep slopes that slope on down to the river. And they give you just this great exposure for the grapes to ripen at an optimal temperature, so that you get that really beautiful balance of acidity and sugar in the wines. Riesling is typically grown in a lot of really cool climate areas, so you sometimes can find higher levels of residual sugar that can naturally occur in the wines. But this is definitely meant to be a drier style, and the Rheingau region is actually known for making a lot of drier style Rieslings. which when you find a very dry Riesling, it can be one of the wildest experiences because naturally as a grape varietal, Riesling has such high levels of acidity that even if it actually has higher levels of residual sugar, sometimes you can't even know that it's there just because the acidity is just so bright and wild and crazy. So while Eva makes many different styles of Riesling, this is one of her like kind of fun everyday styles, which is called Verde. For any of you that have ever had Vinho Verde, which is the style of wine made in northern Portugal, this is actually kind of mirrored after that style of wine, but done with the Riesling grape. Whereas a lot of times Vinho Verde will be a blend, a lot of times with the Alvarinho varietal and a couple others. This is meant to be just like really young, vibrant, and fresh. There's only stainless steel here. There's no oak in any way. And what I love about it is it just has this like vibrant racing acidity that just really cuts through. So loving life right now. When I get to taste this wine, the citrus just like pops so vibrantly. It's really, really wild and crazy. It just initially makes your mouth water. It makes you feel good. It makes you feel energized. At least it makes me feel so. And it's definitely a really great representation of dry Riesling, but also made in a more youthful, vibrant, and fresh way, which is really exciting. There's so many different ways to manipulate Riesling. You can have it, you know, more off dry. You can definitely have it late harvest or in a more dessert wine style. But what I love about this is it's once again meant to be vibrant, fresh, fun, approachable, but still really well made and really well balanced. Does anybody have any questions about this wine so far? No? No questions. Anybody who, oh, go on, please go.
Sorry, I wasn't sure if I was muted or not. It tastes almost, my name's Mary Jo, by the way. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
It tastes almost effervescent to
Yeah.
me. And is that because it's a young wine?
Yeah, it's because it's a young wine. And actually, if you've had Vinho Verde too, the wine from northern Portugal, that has a lot of the same characteristics. It can definitely happen too, especially in some of these cooler climate areas. And then also too with some of these like young, vibrant, fresh wines. It's also a wine that you might notice is under screw cap too. So you can sometimes see like a little bit of that like kind of vibrancy happen when a wine is under screw cap as well. But it's fun, and it's definitely too like in terms of food pairing. I mean, the limit, like it's a limitless amount of options here. I put some pairings in your inserts, and I actually kind of thought about them a little bit more and tried to think of like recipes that might be fun. My suggested pairing here was an apple speck salad with aged balsamic, which is a little bit more Germanic. But that being said, like this would be amazing with oysters. It could be amazing really with anything that you'd want to squeeze a little lemon or lime to, like any dish that might enjoy like a little citrus squeeze, in my opinion, like would just go amazingly with this wine. It can like really nicely pair up to any high acid dish. But that being said, a high acid wine like this can also cut through anything creamy really well too. So it's really going to be one of your ideal food pairing wines. But at the same time too, it's just a nice aperitif. Like I had it last week with my family with just some popcorn, and I was super happy with that. And it was just really lovely and enjoyable. And while this is obviously wonderful for the summertime, which is very far away from us, unfortunately, that being said, I think it's just a really fun wine to enjoy all year round. But there's just something to be said for me about drinking a wine that just feels so energetic. It actually feels like it kind of energizes you too. I know there's a lot of wine sometimes that we drink and you have a glass and you want to go to sleep. This is kind of like the opposite for me. Like this is what I would want to drink if I want to party. So, and we're not partying very much lately, but that's personally how I feel.
Yeah, it's very good.
Cool. Any other questions?
Chelsea, can you hear me?
Yeah. Yes, I can hear you, Wayne.
Along the same lines with the effervescence, I noticed that right away too. And my question was, do you know if it's a function of, there's a little bit of residual sugar in there, and was there any lees contact, and did they do fining or not do fining? And if they didn't, could the effervescence be from a secondary fermentation in the bottle?
Yeah, so definitely in terms of lees, usually a lot of her wines have lees, like a little bit of lees contact. I don't know 100% if this does. It doesn't taste really like it to me personally, but definitely I know for a lot of her other wines she does. Yes, the second fermentation definitely could be from like the lack of fining and filtering, but it also could also be from the fact that it's cool climate up there under screw cap, and it's kind of a traditional thing that can sometimes happen with those two instances. If that answers your question. How's everybody feeling?
Good.
Awesome. Would you like to move on to the next wine? Awesome. We'll do it.
No, I'd like to finish this one first.
That's what I was thinking too.
Everybody can take their time. Obviously, once again, too, please go at your own pace. I'll go through the information, but part of the fun of wine is to really enjoy it and to have fun with it. There's never any rush to do anything when you're drinking wine, in my opinion. So no worries on that. I'll go a little bit into our second wine, which is I actually have it right here, 2016 Chateau de Pligny-Montrachet, which is actually made by producer Domaine de Montiel, and it's called the Clos du Chateau, which is a Bourgogne Blanc. It's a little bit of a mouthful here. We were excited to have this wine for our second choice because of the fact that Gordon's is such a huge purveyor of Burgundy. It's one of our true loves. And our wine director, Ian, is just really enamored with everything that has to do with Burgundy. And from working with Gordon's, I can really see why, just because it is so complex and interesting to have a region that primarily has two grape varietals planted, but that being said, so much complexity. And I will say it's extremely hard to find value in the Burgundy region of France because of the fact that you're, of course, working with a lot of smaller producers. You're working with a region that's really being impacted by climate change. And you're working with, especially for the red wines, with Pinot Noir, which is one of the more expensive grapes to work with just because of all the hand harvesting and a lot of labor involved. And then, of course, too, just the history of the region. So this was a fun wine to be able to work with. This is actually Chateau de Pligny-Montrachet was the original producer, but they were bought by a winery that we do a lot of work with called Domaine de Montiel. They're a producer that's been around since the 1700s. And they were actually basically came down to, and then like around the 1940s or so, came down to a low point in their very long history, where they had almost lost all of their vineyards due to phylloxera, which was has devastated many vineyards over periods of time, which is basically a root louse who had infected all of these vineyards. So you had this winery that was storied, had all these amazing holdings in the Côte d'Or, which is a combination of the Côte de Nuit and the Côte de Beaune in Burgundy. And they had almost wiped out all of their vineyards due to phylloxera and also just a lot of other hardships over the years. And they were able to rebuild back through the next generation of ownership and be able to build a really impressive array of holdings all throughout the Côte d'Or in some of the top Premier Cru and Grand Cru sites of Burgundy. And as they've been kind of accumulating all of these properties over the years, they also too have made some really exciting changes, such as shifting all of their vineyards to organic farming and really taking care of the land which they own. And among some of their exciting acquisitions, they were able to purchase around 2012 Chateau de Pligny-Montrachet, which has an amazing vineyard site, which is called Le Clos du Chateau. And it's actually, if you ever see Clos in reference to Burgundy, it just means it's a walled in vineyard site. So literally completely walled in, single vineyard. So this is actually a single vineyard Bourgogne Blanc. It's basically right next to Pligny-Montrachet, though it's not technically classified as a Pligny-Montrachet. So it's really exciting to be able to find a wine that has such pedigree in terms of being a single vineyard site. It has great provenance and also has really just great complexity to it. But since it doesn't say Pligny-Montrachet on the label, it's going to be about half the price of what you would find. So values in Burgundy are always very, once again, hard to come by. But this is one, in my opinion, that I think is really exciting. Your typical Bourgogne Blanc is going to be Chardonnay, but it can typically come from a lot of different a lot of different vineyards, a lot of different regions that can be blended together. So what makes this, I think, really exciting, something that we're really all about with CruBox, is really having wines that are sourced from more specific places. And especially when we're able to find like special single vineyard sites, I think it's just always that much more special, because when you can taste a wine that comes from one distinctive place, I think it's just a little bit more interesting and exciting. So without further ado, 2016 is actually going to be also the last vintage of this wine that's going to say Chateau de Pligny-Montrachet on the label. And as of 2017, I think Domaine de Montiel will be featured on the label, and it will say Clos de Chateau, which is their vineyard underneath. This is delicious. So basically, this is aged in about 5 to 20% new oak casks in Burgundy. The goal really is to have the oak be well integrated into the Chardonnay, but at the same time, you really want it to be focused. You want it to be bright. You want it to be complex. So oak is just here to basically cradle the wine, to make it better, but it's not the main focus. And that's, I think, what really separates Burgundy from a lot of other Chardonnay producing regions in the world. The barrel is really just there, once again, to kind of cradle the wine. This is actually exciting too, because not only does Le Clos de Chateau organically farmed, it's biodynamically farmed as well. So biodynamic farming will just take organic farming one step further, maybe several steps further, people would argue, which was started by a gentleman in the 1920s who actually was originally a philosopher and scientist, Rudolf Steiner, and he focused on the biodynamic principles of farming, which are basically, it's a whole book of all these different things that you can do to better the vineyard sites, but it's very much focused on holistic principles. Some might find biodynamics to be witchy, but that being said, I think part of what makes it really exciting is people who use biodynamic farming really take their farming super seriously and really want to use the vineyard as kind of an ecosystem so that you can make it the best possible place that it can be, so that everything around it is bettered by that vineyard and everything that surrounds it can better the vineyard site so you can grow the best possible grapes ever. And who doesn't want that? Has anybody gotten to try the Chateau de Pligny-Montrachet, the Clos de Chateau? Or any questions about Burgundy in general or this wine?
I have just a comment. I love the butteriness of this on the finish. It's delicious. That's what I like about white Burgundies as opposed to like a California Chardonnay, which just is so oaky. This one is just, they blended the oak in really well, and it leaves a nice buttery, soft, creamy finish. I think it's, for the price point for a white Burgundy, I think it's perfect.
I have a question.
Yes, I have a question.
I haven't tried it yet, but just as a warning, can you tell me if being biodynamic, it's going to be kind of funky?
Yeah, that's a great question, actually. So like, I think it's really interesting. So there's become like a whole natural wine movement, which, you know, that being said, a lot of these wines that we're tasting tonight are made with either organic principles, biodynamic principles, and a lot of them are natural in principle, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the wine has to be funky, but it can be, right? So
Yeah.
that's what makes it really challenging. This is definitely made in a more classic style.
Yeah.
Definitely no funk here, in my opinion. So you might find that with the next wine that we're drinking tonight, which I can go over after, but definitely much more on the classic style. But that being said, I think what's fun is there's maybe a hint of rusticity here, but I think it's in a very well balanced, beautiful way.
Thanks.
Chelsea, I have a question.
Please ask.
We have a good friend who, she doesn't care for Chardonnay and she likes Chablis. Do you think this would be something that she would enjoy?
Yeah, so I think probably the reason she enjoys Chablis is because Chablis overall tends to be an unoaked version. of
Right.
Chardonnay from Northern Burgundy. This does have oak, once again, a little bit more definitely than the traditional Chablis. But that being said, like I think it's really well integrated once again. And I think that a lot of people who get to try some of these Burgundian styles of Chardonnay who are used to maybe having California Chardonnays or some Chardonnays that are, not at that quality, I think she definitely should be open to trying it. I think it would be really fun. I think similar to Riesling, for me, like Chardonnay and Riesling are two grape varietals that are always really polarizing, right? Because of the fact that you can manipulate them in so many different styles. With Riesling, I mean, it can be really, really sweet to super, super dry. Chardonnay, depending on how you manipulate it with oak, it's going to taste so different. And a bone dry Chardonnay from Chablis versus like a really kind of oak buttery style Chardonnay from Napa Valley, they can both be amazing and great. It depends on your palate and what you're feeling and how you interact with wine. But what's so crazy about Chardonnay is it just can be so incredibly different, just depending on the region and the manipulation. So I think she would definitely like be into trying it, and it'd be interesting to see like what her feedback would be. I would love that.
Well, you know what? We'll give it a bash and we will report back. So thank you.
Amazing. Yes. Awesome. Any other questions?
What causes the butteriness of it?
Oh, so it's through a process called malolactic fermentation. So malolactic fermentation is basically, think about this. Most grape varietals will naturally have malic acid occurring in them, which is the same acid that you find in a green apple. During winemaking, that can naturally change into lactic acid, which is the same acid in butter and milk. So you can choose to stop. You can choose to stop the process of malolactic fermentation. Like if you choose to during winemaking, some people will choose to stop it because they don't want that creamy characteristic. You can do partial malolactic fermentation. But for white wines, you can definitely taste it a lot more than reds, just because white wines are so much more delicate and they're not using the grape skins typically. But it's definitely such a like wild and different process. And a lot of times in places such as Burgundy, you don't always get malolactic fermentation achieved in these cooler climates.
It's delicious.
Yeah, it's really yummy. I think so too. Molly, did you have a question?
Yeah, I was wondering, is white Burgundy always aged in oak then, or not necessarily?
Not necessarily. So like, especially in Chablis, you'll tend to find that a lot of those white Burgundies will tend to be aged in stainless steel. Once again, when you move your way up to some of the top level wines of Chablis, such as like Premier Cru and Grand Cru sites, they'll tend to integrate in some oak because those wines are more meant for longevity. And oak is actually a really important component for aging a lot of white wines, because a lot of white wine naturally, or grapes don't necessarily have tannin to them, because a lot of tannin naturally comes from the grape skins. So not only does oak like integrate in a little wood tannin, which can help like with the aging process, but it also kind of helps to once again kind of cradle that wine and incorporate in really in kind of optimal oxygen flow in and out when the wine's aging, and just helps like with the longevity of the wine. So tend to be the more expensive wines, higher end wines will definitely use oak aging. You'll also find too, as you work your way down to the bottom of Burgundy and the Mâconnais, where you'll find your like Macon Village wines. You'll also find too that a lot of those entry level Burgundies too will typically be stainless steel aged. Typically oak aging too will always raise the price of the wine, because it's not only super expensive to buy barrels, but it's extra time to age as well. So those costs will typically come through to the consumer.
Thank you.
No problem, of course. Any other questions? Cool. Well, I'll let you know about my suggested pairing for this wine, which is, so the classic pairing for red Burgundy, which is going to be Pinot Noir, is going to be a coq au vin, which you actually would typically use with Pinot Noir, or like a red wine. I would use the Pinot Noir, but anybody could use what they wanted to for coq au vin. But there's actually a great recipe. I think it's in the New York Times recipe for a coq au vin blanc. So using white Burgundy as opposed to red. And it's amazing. So I definitely recommend it. If you have any questions about pairings or anything like that, please ask me about this afterwards. But I think that's part of the most fun for me with wine and food is just getting to interact the two of them together, whether you're putting together a complementary pairing where you're putting together a wine and a food that have like-minded kind of characteristics to them, or you're, sorry, a complementary pairing. I have to take a step back on that because I actually said that incorrectly. A complementary pairing would be if you take a wine and you take a food, and both of them have characteristics that can better eat one another. That's always very exciting. Or there's a congruent pairing too, where you can take a like-minded food and like-minded wine and kind of put them together. So I'm always kind of thinking with pairings about like some different kind of unique things that you can do. It is very versatile and it's not always black and white. And at the end of the day, just like with anything with wine, it's really going to depend upon, you know, your specific tastes and what it is you enjoy. I can't tell you how many times I've had wine and food that do not go well together, but I love the wine and I love the food and I just don't care in that moment. So it's totally, once again, everybody has a different way of doing it, and that's part of what's fun. Would you like to move on to the next wine, or does anybody have any questions? We're good. Feeling good. Awesome.
Yep.
Amazing. So we have our first red wine tonight, which is the Anne-Sophie Dubois Les Cocottes, which is
A glass, please. A wine glass.
coming from Fleury, which is going to be right in the Beaujolais region. And this is going to be the 2019 vintage. So what's exciting about this, many things, but basically we're in Beaujolais, which is the most southern region of Burgundy. A lot of people will put Beaujolais in a category of its own, but it is technically a part of Burgundy, France. What makes it kind of unique and different is instead of using Pinot Noir, which is the main grape of Burgundy, they're using Gamay, which is said to be a distant cousin of Pinot Noir, and definitely does not get the same level of respect as the Pinot Noir grape. I think for a long period of time, Beaujolais had kind of a tough time breaking out because of the style of wine called Beaujolais Nouveau, which just about now came out. A style of very new wine, which it basically represents the year's harvest. And a lot of kind of traditional entry-level Beaujolais for a long period of time were very quaffable and fun, but not by any means complex. But that being said, that's changing a lot now. This is a winemaker named Anne-Sophie Dubois. It's our second of the female winemakers for tonight. And what's exciting about Anne-Sophie is she comes from a winemaking family, actually originally from Champagne. So that's kind of where her background is, in the Champagne region, and she knew she wanted to be a winemaker, but she couldn't afford to like have any holdings in Burgundy, and it's so difficult to even get land there anymore. So she went down to Beaujolais, where she wanted to make Burgundian style wines, but she wanted to use the grape Gamay. And so she's in one of the 10 Cru Beaujolais sites. There's 10 Cru Beaujolais villages that are basically some of the top areas to produce Beaujolais, and they are really a step above the traditional Beaujolais or Beaujolais village. And this one is called Fleury. It tends to kind of produce wines that are a little bit more feminine. I always feel like is a weird word to use, but delicate maybe is a great word to use. They're a little bit more of like a delicate, refined style of Gamay, whereas there's a couple other Cru Beaujolais, if anybody's ever had Beaujolais from Brie or from Morgon, which can sometimes be a little bit more brawnier and a little bit more bolder. But this is definitely meant to be a little bit more delicate, refined, more fruit focused, a little bit more floral focused, and just overall really beautiful. All of her holdings are in Fleury. And while she makes several different styles of wine, this is really her most fun offering, which is called Les Cocottes. It is basically a style of Beaujolais that's using a process called carbonic maceration. And carbonic maceration is going to create a style of red wine that's going to have less tannin and going to have more fruit. So it's meant to be, once again, enjoyed more in its youth as opposed to age. So I take a sip. Sometimes one of the like classic characteristics of carbonic maceration in these Beaujolais wines is bubblegum. Not everybody gets that. And once again, everybody's going to get different things out of wine, so I never like to lecture people about what they should and should not get. But I always was a really big fan of bubblegum, so it really it brings out my inner child, which is very exciting. Mm. Mm. This is just delicious. It's fun. It's vibrant. I actually put this in the fridge for about a half an hour before enjoying it. It's just one of those wines that I think is just really, really fun to have chilled. But that being said, temperature is always going to be something that's subjective, right? It's depending on, the environment that you're in, the time of year. But I think that some of these lighter red wines can really be enjoyed with just a little chill on them. It really kind of brings out that like really beautiful vibrancy and freshness. While Sophie Dubois is going to be a organic winemaker. This is once again a style of wine that's made in a kind of natural style, I guess you could say, but there's nothing, once again, funky about this wine. It's a little like earthy, but it's a beautiful kind of combination of just this beautiful dark red fruit, purple flowers, bubblegum, and just tons of mineral freshness. And that's exactly for me, like what I love from some of the red wines from this area. There's great like emphasis on the fruit here, but at the same time, the acidity balances it out really beautifully without being austere. And it's just a wine that's in balance and definitely on the lighter side of things, which is really fun.
I think this would be perfect for Thanksgiving.
Yeah, it is the ideal Thanksgiving wine.
All the spices.
It's always so hard with the Thanksgiving meal. I mean, you have so many different components depending on, and even this year when we'll have much smaller groups gathering for Thanksgiving, I'm sure we'll all still have a lot of different elements to our Thanksgiving table. It's incredibly hard to find a wine that pairs with all of those different elements. And I'd say that this wine, or in Beaujolais in general, is just one of those classic perfect pairings. It can go really well with the turkey itself, but all of the different sides, whether it's sweet potato, butternut squashes, or even to green vegetables, and of course to any meat components as well. It's just incredibly delicious and fun, but still incredibly well made as well. And that's what it's all about. Les cocottes too, for those who don't know, translates to hens. And actually, and Sophie did the label herself. And I love purple, so I was just excited to label that has purple. That makes me
great.
So happy. Any questions about Anne-Sophie or Beaujolais or anything?
So,
Do it that way.
Chelsea, do you
Yeah.
know how old the vines are that she uses, that she has?
Yeah, she has 60-plus-year-old vines that she's working with. So she is definitely working with some older vines. It's interesting. Old vines aren't really important for every single grape varietal, but I'd say that like what I think makes old vines exciting, and I'll just back it up by saying that a lot of producers will put old vines sometimes on their label, and that doesn't necessarily mean anything. But old vines for me, when I think about the term, like I like to think of like about 50-plus years, I think is like starting to get, old for me, for the vines. And what makes old vines more exciting for a lot of these producers is the fact that there might be less yield on the vine, but over time, think about it as going through kind of this process of natural selection where the berries that stay there and the what remains is really kind of the highest quality of the bunch. So it can be, once again, more expensive to farm that way, but it can really pay off in terms of getting just some of the best quality fruit.
So two other things. Number one,
Yeah, let's go for it.
that woman was right on. I always have myself a 3-liter bottle of Cru Beaujolais at Thanksgiving. This year with a smaller crowd, I'll probably only go with a Magnum, but
Yeah. Okay.
but I love Beaujolais at Thanksgiving. I think it's able to be drunk with almost anything on the table, unless you have asparagus or something like that. But I think Beaujolais and Thanksgiving is a perfect match.
Awesome. I agree. I'm a huge fan. For me, I'm always drinking at Thanksgiving Cru Beaujolais, or I'm always going the white route too. And I'm a huge fan of Chenin Blanc from the Loire. So that's usually my jam, but who knows this year? I haven't made a decision of what we're drinking yet. And I like to do it last minute and just go for it. So I know we'll be once again a smaller group, but I'm sure we'll drink just as many bottles of wine is what usually happens. Would you like to move on to the next wine, or are there any questions? Oh, please ask Molly.
First of all, Wayne, we love 3 liters too. So if you need company next year on Thanksgiving when we're not social distancing, you can call us. But James has a question.
Yeah, are they for aging this wine? Are they more of like concrete or foudre, or I'm guessing concrete?
Yeah, they're using concrete here. So once again, concrete's just going to be an alternative to stainless steel, but it's a better quality alternative in the sense that you can still get the freshness and vibrancy out of the wine, but you have like a little bit more interplay of oxygen. So it just creates a wine, I think, that just has great balance and freshness.
Yeah,
and it's more ancient.
Yeah, wines that age in concrete, sometimes I feel like I can pick it up in a good way, though.
Yeah, definitely a little bit of that, maybe. Kind of minerally stony quality for sure. Would you like to move on to the grand finale? Okay, we're doing it. Awesome. So for our last wine, we have, let's see, let me bring this over. We have the GD Vira 2016 Barolo. It's called Albe, coming from the Barolo region in Piedmont in northwestern Italy. This is definitely something that I was super excited about selecting for this month, as GD Vira has always been one of my favorite properties to work with. I had the great pleasure with my family several years ago of going to visit GD Vira and visit the family. And I'll never forget, before going on that trip, one of the family members, Francesco, he gave me a card when I was at a trade show, and he said, "This is an invitation to Italy." And I was like, yes. I just really loved, I mean, obviously it was incredibly charming, but it was just a really fun way of kind of kicking off my relationship with GD Vira. And I've just really enjoyed getting to work with them ever since. It's a really lovely family-owned winery, and they couldn't be nicer people. It's just I think what makes wine so exciting for me many a time is the ability to get to meet a lot of these producers. And sometimes you think that they're going to be, they know so much more than you in their specific area. So it's not always going to be easy to get to know them, but it's always the opposite. I've just always been so blown away by what incredible generosity there is in our industry, and just how amazing a lot of these people are. And the Vira family is just incredibly sweet and kind and lovely. They actually have within their vineyard, which is actually located in the town of Barolo. There's the town of Barolo, and then there's 11 kind of villages that comprise the Barolo DOCG. But what's really cool about their winery is their actual winemaking facility has all of these beautiful stained glass windows, like a chapel on the side. So the light comes in, and there's these beautiful multicolored stained glass windows. So they really treat their winemaking facility like a chapel. A place to worship, and I can get behind that worship 100%. So they make so many different wines within the Vira portfolio, but definitely what they're most well known for are their Barolos. And for those of you that enjoy Barolo as much as I do, I think that they make some really exceptional Barolo wines. So Barolo is going to be, once again, coming from the Barolo region of Piedmont. It's going to be 100% Nebbiolo. And what makes it so incredibly exciting is you have a minimum aging requirement, minimum of 3 years to release Nebbiolo. So you have to keep it for several years in oak, and they'll typically use Slovenian oak too, which is a very kind of traditional way of aging a lot of kind of classic Italian reds. It's a style that's going to be not as intense and powerful as American oak, and a little bit more similar and refined to French oak, but just a little more traditional for Italian winemaking. And it'll, once again, oak is here to be able to kind of integrate really nicely in with the wine, but it's not the overall rock star. The rock star is Nebbiolo. Nebbiolo is known for having just beautiful high levels of acidity naturally, and it actually translates to basically foggy one, because nebbia is the root word for fog. And what I think makes Nebbiolo one of the most kind of interesting grape varietals is it's one of those grapes for me that's not as like berry fruit focused as a lot of other grapes. It's definitely much more earth focused. And it has naturally such high levels of acidity and tannin that it can sometimes be really austere to some. Um, and not to others. It depends on how you feel. But definitely Barolo and then the neighboring region of Barbaresco are going to be two of the most classic areas for production. This is a straight up Barolo or Barolo Normale, as you might call it, but you can definitely get your way into, especially through GD Vira and other producers, Cru Barolos, which are coming from very distinctive specific vineyard sites around the Barolo region. What's cool about the Albe is it's actually a combination of 3 different vineyard sites that they select grapes from, and they're all coming from different plantings with different like facing slopes. So Albe actually translates to basically sunrise because you can actually see the sunrise from 3 distinctive different areas as the growers are selecting the grape varietals. It is once again incredibly hard to find value in Barolo just because of many different things, because A, Nebbiolo is such a challenging grape to work with. B, the fact that you're farming on these incredibly steep slopes, kind of more similar to almost the steepness that you find in the Rheingau in Germany or Mosel Valley. And it requires a ton of hard hand harvesting and back-breaking work. And then 3, the fact that you're aging, for several years in oak, and many times a lot of producers wait even 5 years before they'll release some of their Barolo wines, because these are wines that aren't necessarily meant to drink right away. Sometimes you want to give them a minimum of 10 years before you even touch them. But what's cool about the Albe Barolo from GD Vira is I think it is more of an entry level in terms of you can age this for 10 plus years, but you could also drink it relatively soon and you could drink it now. And that's kind of very rare to find something that's so approachable, but still made with such integrity and such high quality winemaking and organic viticulture. It's just incredibly exciting. So without further ado, as I have a sip, you'll also notice too, so like something that might be fun too to use for tastings, if I don't know if you have done it for tonight, but you can maybe think about it in the future, is if you hold up a piece of white paper, if you don't have any type of white background, you can always see the color of the wine. And sometimes that's really interesting. Like for example, with the Beaujolais that we just tasted beforehand, that's going to always have this beautiful classic kind of ruby red color to it, which is very similar to the color of Pinot Noir. So you can actually sometimes in a blind tasting get the 2 of them confused. But similar to that, Sangiovese, the grape varietal traditionally of Tuscany, is something that you can sometimes by sight get a little confused with Nebbiolo from Piedmont, as it sometimes has this beautiful kind of very subtle kind of orangey red, almost like rusty kind of color naturally to it. And as that wine kind of continues to age, as you put it against a white background, you'll see something called the rim variation on the glass, where the rim kind of starts to separate out from the color that goes into the middle of the wine. And you can actually start to kind of understand a little bit more about the aging of the wine if you don't know what you're trying. So it's definitely really interesting to kind of learn some of these like tasting techniques, and I'm happy to kind of break them down for you further. But with Barolo and such an amazing, elegant wine, it's just really exciting to kind of really get your senses prepared for the experience and really just take it slow with this wine. It's a much more complex animal, and every single sip is going to get you something a little bit different. Wow, it's exciting. The cool thing too is for those of you that don't finish a bottle in one night, which is very normal, and I should definitely take a note from that. Definitely what's really exciting about the Nebbiolo grape is the fact that you should really think about over time. It's one of the few wines that you can actually kind of have open for several days and not have to worry about oxidizing the wine. Because Nebbiolo is one of those grapes that does really well with oxygen. So I'll typically open a Barolo several hours before wanting to enjoy it. It's usually best. This definitely, the Elbe is a little bit of an outlier to that because it does take a little less than some of the other Barolos that I've had, but it is something that you could try over a period of several days and see how it develops. It really does take well with oxygen. And it's something that I think is really kind of an exciting thing to explore with wines, is kind of how they develop over the course of several days. Certain wines are always going to develop a little bit better and much worse than others. So it's very interesting. Are there any questions about GD Vira, about Barolo, that I can answer for you? It's like one of the most incredible areas. If there is anybody that hasn't visited or that has visited and wants to share a story, please go for it.
So what does DOCG mean?
Oh my gosh. So this is where Italian wine gets really crazy. So we have basically 4 different levels in Italian winemaking. You have your basically Vino da Tavola wines, your entry level wines. You have what's now called, I think, IGT or IGP wines, which kind of represent a general vicinity or area of the 20 different winemaking regions. And then DOC and DOCG are your top tier wines, which represent very small, distinctive places. So DOC stands for Denominazione Origine Controllata, and then the G stands for Garantita. So it tends to be some of the most kind of storied wine regions are going to fall within the DOCG category, and they have to apply to get that level and get that status. So what you get out of a wine that has this DOCG label is, if it says Barolo on the label, it has to adhere to very strict standards of the Barolo DOCG. That's aging requirements, the grape varietal that's used, the yields. There's just so many different factors that go into what makes this wine distinctive. And they're really, once again, trying to represent a sense of place here. And the Italians really love to do this. Definitely, you will find a lot of the DOCG wines sometimes can be a little bit more expensive, because sometimes the aging that goes into them is very labor intensive and it's a lot. But then at the same time, there's some incredible values that span throughout Italy as well. And if you want to get a little geeky with me and go down that rabbit hole, I'll do it with you any day, because this is one of my favorite areas. So, does that answer your question?
Yeah, I guess as a consumer, you know, if you go to the DOCG, that's probably the best bet.
Yeah, no, there's definitely, but there's a lot of great, you know, value to be had in Italy. And there's also a lot of producers that are in DOC areas, DOC regions that actually like are incredible wines as well. Sometimes they're applying for their DOCG status. They haven't gotten it yet. I'll have to double check, and I hope I'm not speaking incorrectly here. I could be, but one of my favorite regions in Italy is going to be Mount Etna, the Etna Rosso wines of Mount Etna in Sicily. And I don't think that they've achieved DOCG status, but in my opinion, they're some of the top wines in Italy. So it's just sometimes a matter of time, and you know, it's a process. If anybody's ever been to Italy, it's very slow. Everything is, you know,
Very slow.
it goes slow, which is great. Any other questions? Go for it, Molly.
So I actually studied in Italy. Love Italy. It's chaotic. It's unorganized.
Yeah.
People are great. The culture is great. The food is great. And I love wines from Barolo. But what's like characteristic of them? Like tasting wise? Why do I love them so much? I guess I need help.
You like Pinot Noir? Like, is Pinot Noir a great? So I personally compare Nebbiolo to Pinot Noir in the sense that it's also very refined, and it's a very complex style of wine. It's a wine that really reflects its sense of place. But that being said, the difference between Nebbiolo and Pinot Noir is Nebbiolo just has a ton more tannic structure to it. So it's going to have much more of that kind of drying sensation, much more of that kind of bite. And that's where a lot of these wines need some more aging in oak to soften those tannins. But the difference in terms of aromatics is definitely the classic characteristics of Barolo tend to be kind of roses, tar, dark cherry, and a lot of really beautiful, vibrant spices that can come through as well. It definitely is one of those wines that's not, once again, as fruit focused as a lot of the other kind of typical red varietals out there. And I think part of what I think is so beguiling about Barolo is the fact that you just get this beautiful kind of interplay of aromatics, and each sip kind of transports you into a little bit of a different world. You can get something new every single sip, in my opinion. But I think it's once again that interplay of like the floral, mineral, very kind of subtle dark cherry, almost black cherry fruit sometimes that you can get with a lot of those kind of forest floor characteristics and very earthy characteristics that come through that make it so exciting. It's just like it's a wine I'm so enamored with. And I'm glad you are too.
I am too, for sure. Thank you.
Of course. Any other questions? No, okay. Well, we did it. We're like, basically we're at 6:56. Like it's pretty wild. We got through 4 different wines. And once again, no expectations to open them all for these events. I just thought it would be a fun way to kind of really kind of dive deep into some of these wines a little bit more. And two, I'll work for next month too, to maybe we'll bring in some like elements, like a little PowerPoint so you guys can see some photos, because I think at the end of the day, we're not able to travel right now. So any way that we can transport ourselves to a different place, I think is just incredibly exciting. And I think part of the fun of like learning about these wines is you're learning about some of these different cultures, you're learning about some of these different cuisines. We can really take it to a level where it's not just about the wine, but it's about the really exciting lifestyle that revolves around these wines, and just about the enjoyment overall. We can all use some enjoyment in our lives, especially during this time, but always. So we can kind of keep on refining this,
this was
making
awesome.
it better. But that being said, any feedback that you guys have, I'm so excited to hear about it, because at the end of the day, I just want you to all feel like you're learning something, having fun, and really able to ask some questions, because wine, once again, is always going to be a journey. It's always every day is learning. I'm learning things new that are new every day, and I hope you all are too. And there's never any reason to not ask those questions. So anything else before we're
Chelsea, all Jay and I want to say is this has been amazing. We've learned so much. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us. And we cannot wait. We tried this, but we cannot wait to try the others and the next box. So thank you so much for sharing all of your knowledge with us.
Of course, yeah.
So happy.
It's such a pleasure.
Thank you.
As many can see, probably there's a lot of family and friends here with me tonight, which is really special. But it's exciting for everybody to be here tonight. And it's just fun to be gathering like this, in a way where we're all have a mutual excitement for wine, and we all have a excitement to just learn a little bit more about it. And there is just beautiful energy in this virtual room. So thank you all so much for.
Thank you. This was wonderful. Thank you.
It was so fun. And then also too, please use me as a resource. If I can ever answer any questions for you, have my email. Super happy to do so about CruBox or just about Gordon's in general. I'd love to be a resource, and I just really look forward to getting to do this again with you soon. I'll be sending out information about December's box shortly, as
Thank
December
you.
is right around the corner.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Wonderful.
Yeah,
Happy Thanksgiving to everyone. Chelsea, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Chelsea, you're awesome.
See ya.
Thank you, Chelsea.
Bye.
JJ, you look awesome. And Jackie, you always look awesome.
Talk to you soon, guys.
Bye.